Good morning, everybody. For each Sunday, Peter sets out the 4 readings in the lectionary. Usually 2 are Old Testament, including a psalm, and 2 are in the New Testament, always a gospel reading, and mostly one of the letters of Paul. I always enjoy looking at all 4 of them to see if there are any common themes. And yes, 3 out of the 4 for today all mention the importance of bread. So there didn't seem much escape from taking this as my theme. The St. John's Gospel verses talk of Jesus being the bread of life. The Exodus one's about the Israelites grumbling about being led into the desert and starving for bread, when they felt better off in captivity, actually. And Psalm 78 refers to this grumbling, the people forgetting what God had done for them in providing bread in the past and delivering them from slavery, and not trusting him for their future. In today's gospel reading, Jesus chides the crowd for seeking him out, not because he had shown them signs and wonders, which showed God's power and care, but because he had recently fed all of them with as much food as they could eat. Jesus was frustrated, I think, because their minds were on their stomachs and not on their souls. And this set me thinking about the role of food in my own life, in the Bible, and in our culture. Jesus questioned the crowd's motive. Nothing wrong in wanting your lunch, but it would seem that for many of the people wanting to be with Jesus, it started to get in the way of their following him with a right spirit. Food for the body became more important than food for the soul. I understand this because I'm sometimes guilty of doing this myself. I can spend much more time thinking about what to buy and cook for tea and how nice it will be to eat my sausage pie than what shall I read today that will encourage me spiritually. I have some spare time, so shall I have a pray or make a cup of tea and a piece of cake? Well, they're not actually mutually exclusive. In our Exodus reading, the life of the fleeing Hebrews was tending to dominate about what they would eat, and they grumbled and questioned Moses and indeed God about what he was doing with them, and why couldn't things go back to how they were? They had plenty of food back then. God was giving food each day with certain instructions. Don't over-collect. Take enough for today. But the people disregarded these and disobeyed. They did their own thing. God's teaching them the lessons of contentment were going unheeded. His teaching that he would provide what they needed for each day, they could trust him, were also going unheeded. Our culture in this country in so many respects has become a more one, do you think? And of course there are any amount of TV and magazine ads about what to buy, what to cook, what to try next. Don't get me wrong, nothing whatsoever with a nice cooking program or an exciting new recipe. But do we really need so many? Is it possible to get just a little obsessed with food and its preparation in our lives? I wonder. Man and woman shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God, reminds Jesus. His being to us the bread of life is a powerful metaphor, a picture of what God's words mean to us in the life of our spirits. Of course, a lovely meal can be a true blessing. I know for many of us in lockdown days, the main meal of the day became a major event. I know I really looked forward to this highlight of the day. I think it taught me to be really thankful. You never quite knew if you would have just what you wanted for a recipe, did you? Or what would be available on the shelves, when sometimes supplies were low. You might just have to make do. And maybe we're finding this true in these days again, as there are problems with shelf supplies due to COVID workers having to withdraw and isolate. True godliness with contentment is itself great gain, says Paul to Timothy. And don't these times when shortages are likely offer to teach us this? And teach us that there is for us to buy, and that what there is there for us to buy and to eat is such a blessing to be so valued. How often do we go down to the shop or receive deliveries for food and consciously say, "Thank you, God, for your provision and care in providing this food"? I know that I rarely have done, but I'm going to start practicing now. I want to get into the habit of thanking God for his provision, not just as I actually eat, but as I shop too. And whilst I'm about it, to thank God for the workers who have brought the food, the transport drivers, the farmers, the packers, the shop staff. Certainly, food can set up all sorts of connections and have all sorts of outcomes for us. Who of us has not had a bit of a comfort eat now and again? Certainly I have. A couple of nice pieces of chocolate will make me feel better. Well, perhaps it does. But then why am I not putting "take it to the Lord in prayer," to quote a popular hymn, first? I find it all too easy, I'm afraid, to wag a finger at the early Hebrews grumbling because they're not finding God's manna in the desert sufficient for them, or at the crowds following Jesus in order to eat their fill, when I sometimes myself put food for the body before food for the soul. It's amazing how much the Bible has to say about food, actually. There are pages about observing the different feasts, of unleavened bread, of harvest, of weeks, of booths, as well as the Passover meal, of course. Celebratory meals, great idea. Kill the fatted calf for our absent son's return. And in the book of Revelation we have, "Blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb." Sounds like a feast, certainly. It would be remiss of me, perhaps, if I were not here to mention fasting from food. Hunger strikers have taken this path in years past to drive home a message that they have felt reaches in no other way. And the Bible itself, of course, mentions that fasting can have very positive effect on God's kingdom and on our own relationship with him. Jesus fasted when he was tested by Satan and needed God's Spirit for wisdom and strength. He needed God to be close. In our readings today, we have seen the connection of food provision and God's care for us. It must be so hard for those in our world who are literally starving to visualize a caring God providing for them. Yet some of them manage to do it. They must be especially graced. There is a balance to remember between feeding ourselves and feeding others. There are those in our own society, as well as those in distant places of our world, who struggle to put bread on the table. I know I need to be mindful of what I do eat, so that my food sources are sustainable, and that I'm not using up more resources of the earth than I actually need, when so many humans and creatures are on the edge of starvation. We might already be popping something in the food bank trolley at the supermarket, or sending off money to an organisation involved in aid distribution. These things can make such a difference. And I thought that for myself, as a response to my own talk, that I would add up everything I spend on food in a week and send off a tenth, or maybe more, of the cost to an agency specifically seeking to meet the needs of the hungry. I believe God has a great joy in providing for us, and in this he shows his love and care. And we in turn can show our love and care to others. Yes, by supporting aid organisations and our local food bank, but also very much so in sharing directly the food we have with others. A lovely gift of hospitality. Sharing what we have gladly with others very much mirrors the generosity of God with all he gives to us. And if we are sharing with people outside our known circle, perhaps the big issue seller, then there is that lovely verse from Hebrews 13. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained strangers, angels even, unawares. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Entertaining angels unawares. Don't you just love it? I will end by sharing the LOAF, Loaf Principles of the Green Christian Organisation. They use this acronym to encourage us to eat food which is locally produced, organically grown, animal friendly, in terms of welfare, I guess, and fairly traded. I'd love to now explore these principles, but they would constitute 4 more sermons, and I will spare you them today, at any rate.